Who doesn't like pizza? I know I do. It is said that more than 5 billion pizzas are sold worldwide each year, and an estimated 350 slices eaten every second. Originally an Italian dish consisting of a flat round base of dough baked with a topping of tomato sauce, cheese, and normally with added meat, vegetables, or even fish based on one's preference. My favorite is the pepperoni pizza. This video will detail how one of the most prolific American serial killer was taken down by a slice of pizza. My name is Chantal, and this is my first video. Please consider joining me on my journey by subscribing to my channel if you have an interest in true crime. I will be posting videos weekly. This is the case of the Grim Sleeper. It was Saturday night, November the 20th, 1988, while walking to a friend's house for a party. Anitra Washington had no premonition of danger when a man pulled up next to her in his orange Ford Pinto and politely offered her a ride. The mother of two initially declined the offer, but the man wouldn't relent. "That's what's wrong with you, black woman. People can't be nice to you," he told her at one point. Washington felt sorry for the man and changed her mind. She described him as shorter than her, in his early 30s, and neatly dressed in a button-up shirt and khakis. "I guess I appeared standoffish, and when he said it, I thought he was being nice, and I felt sorry for him," she said. "I thought maybe I came off rough, and I said, 'Okay, you can take me to the house,'" she recalled. That decision would haunt Washington for more than 2 decades, as she will be known officially as the lone survivor of the Grim Sleeper. She recalled the conversation started out smoothly. It was comfortable. It wasn't too out there, and he wasn't putting out any red flags, she said. But the man today, known as Franklin Jr., took a left turn instead of going straight ahead. As soon as he turned the corner, he snapped. He was calling me by someone else's name, and I was like, "Who are you talking to?" He subsequently went on ranting and threatening to kill her if she yelled, leaving Washington bewildered and confused. She remembered thinking to herself, "Okay, it's time for me to get out of this car." Then out of nowhere, Franklin pulled out his signature .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun and shot Washington in the chest. Washington recalled not realizing she had been shot, reached for the door, when Franklin threatened to shoot her again. It wasn't until Franklin said those words that she realized she was shot. "I'm like, what? You shot me?" as she pleaded with Franklin to take her to the hospital. He looked at me like I was crazy and then said, "No, I can't do that," she said, remembering the horrifying sequence of events. Washington passed out for a while, and when she came back to her senses, she saw Franklin snapping pictures. She remembered seeing the flashes and passing out again. The next time she opened her eyes, Franklin was on top of her. "You know, my panties were torn. I got raped by him," Washington said. "Then I started feeling the pain. Somehow, she opened the car door, and that's when he pushed her out of the vehicle, sending her rolling in the alley. Washington was bleeding and disoriented. She somehow managed to walk to her friend's house nearby and passed out on her front porch. She was subsequently rescued and rushed to hospital. "I woke up under a sheet but naked," Washington remembered. "I thought I died." Doctors later told her how lucky she was, as the bullet had been deflected by her ribcage and missed her heart. "I was like, 'Thank you, Father God,'" she recollected. The bullet that was extracted from Washington's chest was found by ballistics expert to be fired from the same gun that was used to kill 8 other women in the same area, but this information was not released for another 20 years. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born on August 30th, 1952 in Los Angeles, California. He was married for over 30 years to Sylvia Franklin, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl. At the time, he worked as a mechanic for the Los Angeles Police Department and later as a sanitation worker. Neighbors remembered Franklin Jr. as a regular guy leading a normal life. It would later emerge that there was a lot more to him than being just another family man. During the 1980s, Franklin stalked the streets of Los Angeles and targeted vulnerable black women, usually drug addicts or prostitutes, before raping and killing them. Franklin earned his infamous nickname, the Grim Sleeper, because he appears to have taken a 14-year hiatus from his crimes between 1988 and 2002. Not much is known about his childhood, but after high school, he enlisted in the army and was discharged dishonorably after participating in the gang rape of a young girl while stationed in Germany. Franklin had begun his reign of terror with 2 other servicemen where they stopped along a highway to ask directions from a teenage girl. Then they lured her inside the vehicle with the offer of a ride home. When she accepted, they put a knife to her throat, drove to a field, and repeatedly raped her. She was able to feign interest in Franklin, tricking him into giving her his phone number, which police later used to identify him. During the gang rape, photographs were taken by one of the rapists, as Franklin did later of the women he raped and murdered. Upon his return to the States, Franklin blended in with society and continued a normal way of life. He lived on 81st Street, Western Avenue, South Central Los Angeles, the part of town with the worst schools, the worst hospitals, and no jobs. Less than 50% of the community graduate high school. These people who are living in one of the world's most prosperous cities, but being left behind. In 1989, he was convicted of 2 charges of theft, 1 charge of misdemeanor assault, and 1 charge of battery. He served time for one of the theft charges. Franklin had an obsession of taking photos of his encounters with women, first on Polaroids, and then later upgrading with his cell phone and videos. The victims ranged in age 14 to 36. All had been shot with a .25 caliber pistol or strangled. All but one of his victims were black. Their bodies were found in alleys, hidden behind stray bushes and trash cans. Many of the women were initially listed as Jane Does and were prostitutes. The deaths grew little, if any, media attention. No one really knows for sure when Franklin embarked on his killing spree, because the murders were considered NHI cases, which is a LAPD code for no humans involved. This monkey was applied to cases that mostly involve sex workers, drug addicts, ex-cons, the homeless, and persons whose victimization the police weren't inclined to investigate. Police kept the slayings quiet, despite suspicions that a serial killer was stalking black women, a decision that led to outrage and condemnation from many who attributed Franklin's longevity as a killer to the police indifference. Also, in the mid-80s, the public image of a serial killer was generally that of a white male targeting mainly white females. Franklin, being a black man targeting black women, stayed under the radar in the worst ways, earning him the title of one of the most prolific serial killers in America. By 1989, it was apparent that black women were being preyed upon. Frustration grew with the apathy of the LAPD. The Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders, formed by Margaret Prescott to bring awareness about these murders, established a reward for anyone or providing information leading to the arrest of the killer. Margaret Prescott can be seen leafleting the neighborhood as early as 1985, an astounding 25 years before Franklin was arrested. The coalition felt it was irresponsible and racially motivated that information about the murders and the profile were not being released in order to better protect black women in South Central LA. Arisen from his slumber to continue his reign of terror in the 2000s, the LAPD finally acted after the death of Janice Peters in 2007. Coming up short of an exact match for DNA in their database, they searched anyone who shared a familial relationship and came across Franklin's son, Christopher, who at the time was convicted of a weapons charge in 2008. Concluding that Christopher was too young to have committed the crime in the 80s, they focused their attention on his father, Lonnie David Franklin Jr. in 2010. While monitoring Franklin Jr., the LAPD followed him to a pizzeria near Buena Park, California. According to Los Angeles District Attorney Steve Cooley, detectives then used a piece of discarded pizza with Franklin's DNA to make the link. One Los Angeles undercover police officer pretended to be a waiter at the restaurant where the suspect ate. He collected dishes, silverware, glasses, and pizza crust to obtain DNA, which was analyzed and then determined to be a match for the Grim Sleeper. On July 7, 2010, Franklin's house was raided by the police, and he was subsequently arrested. He was charged with 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder between 1985 to 2007. The disturbing thing about the case of the Grim Sleeper is that the police only had proof of his involvement with 25 victims, but discovered a collection of more than 1,000 photos and videotapes of women and teenage girls in Franklin's possession. His house was described as a junkyard with porn magazines in the bathroom. He even kept a shoebox with pictures of women in explicit positions in the glove compartment of his vehicle. It is believed that Franklin lured these women in with cash, cocaine, or liquor, and many of these victims' bodies have never been recovered. On August 10, 2010, Franklin was sentenced to death. He met his demise on March 29, 2020, where he was found unresponsive in his cell. It is still unclear, but at the time of the discovery, there was no sign of trauma. The real tragedy of this case was the indifference by the LAPD. Imagine if they had treated victim number 1 with a minuscule of humanity, so many more lives would have been saved. Even in Anitria's case, she should have been an asset to the LAPD because she was able to bring them to the same street that Franklin lived on and will be arrested a whopping 22 years later. She was even able to describe the orange Pinto in details, the same car that his previous victim was seen getting into. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The police described her as being unreliable. It's unclear how many victims have died at Franklin's hands. It's unbelievable that his wife and son who had lived with him at the time, and even his close friends and families, didn't realize what was happening right under their noses. I do think that if these victims' reality were different, then maybe they would have gotten the justice they deserve sooner and more lives would have been spared. Unfortunately, most of these women were black, poor, prostitutes, drug addicts, and help failed to reach them at the time when the crack epidemic was consuming the lives of the African American communities. My sincerest condolences to the family and friends of these victims. May their soul rest in peace. That brings us to the end of the video. What do you think about this case? Please leave your thoughts down in the comment section and let me know. By the way, I will be accepting constructive criticism as I am new to this platform. If you like this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. See you next Thursday.